Yeah.
I think I didn't because honestly, my parents changed. They dang near light one up. So it just turned me on.
Back then, that was pretty common, wasn't it?
Everybody. Classic camel shorts.
Yeah. That's funny. I have a cool little family picture you guys have of when you were a little kid in your living room with
Yeah.
your brother's graduating. Who was it? Yeah. Yeah. It's not. It's like cold or.
Good evening, everyone. We'll open taxation. Mayor and council members of the public that are in attendance tonight and those watching on TV, welcome. This is the annual Truth in Taxation hearing. This is our public informational hearing on the 2024 budget and tax levy. For those of you that are in attendance, there was some handouts out on the table out there. The presentation that I'll be going through, you can follow that on paper if you like, if you picked it up. So first off, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking. There'll be some opportunities to answer some questions at the end, and I usually say too, if you have a quick question, don't be afraid to interrupt me. So I'm going to share a lot of data, a lot of information. There might be some things I miss on. Hopefully I'll answer some questions, and if not, there's an opportunity for both questions and then obviously public comment to the city council towards the end of this presentation. But tonight, these are the various different items that I'll be touching on. We'll touch on the budget process to date, general truth and taxation hearing information. I'll have some information how we compare. We'll look at property taxation 101. We'll look at the tax levy and the general fund. We'll run briefly over our enterprise funds, take a quick look at our capital improvement and debt management plan, and then once again, kind of a summary conclusion and opportunity for questions and feedback, both from the council and the public. So with that being said, we'll jump right into it. Process to date, city council and staff have had 4 public work sessions over the past 7 months regarding the budget. This is technically our 5th public work session. City council adopted the preliminary budget and tax levy in September. The truth and taxation notices were mailed out to all city property owners last month based off of that preliminary levy that was established back in September. The purpose of this meeting, the reason that hopefully you're here tonight, the main purpose is and this is kind of taken right out of the state law, the main purpose of the truth and taxation hearing is to enhance the public participation in the property tax system by allowing the public forum to discuss the proposed budget, proposed tax levies, talk about increases or explain increases in both the budget and the tax levy, then hear public comments and questions on the budget and tax levy. Tonight is our truth and taxation hearing. If there's a need to have a continuation of that hearing, it will be Tuesday during the city council meeting. And then the final plan for the council is to adopt the budget and tax levy, whatever that may be, at our second meeting in December, which it's our intentions to move that up to December 19th. We'll officially do that at our December 12th council meeting instead of the 26th. So those are the kind of, obviously tonight and the next 2 meetings where the budget will be discussed and then eventually approved. So with that, we'll just get into some general information. I always like to point out that just from a data standpoint, the source is the city of Hutchinson. Otherwise, we'll make sure that we note that if it's not from the city of Hutchinson. Just a quick reminder, tonight we discussed the city's share of your total 2024 proposed tax bill, not property valuations. And the reason I say that is because this is, I think, the 21st time I've done a truth and taxation hearing. I think the previous 20 people wanted to come and talk about evaluations, and that's not the purpose of this meeting. I'll talk about when that occurs, but that is not the purpose of the meeting tonight. Tonight is to talk about the city's share of your proposed taxes that are on your tax statement. So it'll be the county, the school district, the city, and also be some other taxing districts. Tonight we're talking about the city's portion of your tax bill. I always like to kind of put this little calendar cycle up, kind of just to give an idea of where we're at in the process. We're obviously in December, and so we're talking about budgets and tax levies. In March, you'll get your tax statement for last year's valuation. They'll have valuations in April. May is the time to talk about or to appeal the valuation of your property. And I'll touch on that a little bit. So on valuations, in Minnesota, the market value of a property is determined by January 2nd of the year prior to the year in which taxes on that property are due. In other words, market values for taxes payable in 2024, which would have been on your statement, were set in January of 2023. Property values on statements recently received are based off of home sales or property sales from October of 2021 to September of 2022. Property owners will receive new notices of market values from the assessor in March, April of 2024. Questions on those valuations should be addressed at the open book meeting that's held in May or June at the county, usually at the county assessor's office. With that being said, I do, just because I know people do show up and sometimes have concerns on valuations, I do want to show a little bit about what we're seeing here in town. Once again, this is based off of market data. This is what the market is seeing for home sales. And you can see, at least from a home sales standpoint, how sales prices have been impacted over the last several years. This is going back to actually when we bottomed out in 2012 to where we're at. I think the 2023 numbers are as of October of this past year. And so those are the median home sale prices. We've seen a 7% increase over the last year and an 87% increase since 2016. And so part of what we're seeing is with the tight housing market, we're seeing a large increase in home values and what home prices are selling for, which is then pushing up values across the entire city. I think the important thing to note too is that the state sets guidelines on where property values need to be. That's the responsibility of the county assessor to set those. They have to fall within 90 to 110% of the median sales price within a given community. So sometimes I think it's just important to share that with those that may have questions on valuations. First off, the preliminary tax levy that was sent out in September and the property tax effect on the statement that you got in the mail showed a city tax increase of 9.3%. At that time, the preliminary budget was balanced. The revised budget that will be discussed tonight includes a 7.2% tax levy increase and a balanced budget. So since September, the city has adjusted its revenue and expense projections and eliminated roughly just over $178,000 in taxes. Once again, since our preliminary budget was adopted in September. So I usually like just to kind of show some comparisons on things that we look at in regards to our property tax rate and where we rank, where we're at in regards to the county and then other outstate regional centers. And some of it is based off of the most recent data too, so I'll make sure I highlight that. So when we look at other cities within McLeod County, Hutchinson had the second lowest tax rate in 2023. You can see at 53.65%. What our preliminary levy did was shown right in that middle screen of having an increase of almost 2%, and then with the adjustments, what we're looking at for a proposed tax increase for our tax rate for 2024. So that's with other cities within McLeod County. We look at 19 outstate regional centers for comparisons. These are small regional centers, so they don't include like St. Cloud, Duluth, Mankato, but the most recent data is from 2022. We're kind of right in the middle of the pack regarding those other outstate regional centers. In 2012, we were 11th with 60.41%. As I noted, our proposed 2024 rate is 54.22. One thing I do like to note, because the question comes up and the comment gets made, is that the city of Hutchinson's taxes are extremely high. And my question is, compared to what? Or compared to who? We talked about where we're at in regards to the rest of the county. We showed where we're at in regards to the outstate regional centers. Statewide, the average city tax is 74.65% is the average city tax rate. So when you look at overall, we're below the state average. We're kind of middle of the pack in regards to outstate regional centers, and we're on the low side when it comes to other cities within McLeod County. A couple of things that we always like to at least highlight as we compare with other regional centers. We do have the fourth lowest percent of the population below the poverty level. I always say anything above 0% is too much, but we are on the low side of that. The fifth highest median household income, the seventh highest home value. Now this is based off of census data because that's the best way to compare. You may recall I just showed you a graph that showed that our median home value is at 261,000. Census data is always lagging behind. So their most recent data, which is the easiest thing to compare ourselves to throughout the entire state, has us at 164,000. Well, that's based off of their 2022 census estimate. So, in regards to the outstate regional centers, we get just over 2.67 in local government aid. That's the state aid to the cities. That's the fourth lowest out of the outstate regional centers. And then the last 2 points I just want to highlight, the preliminary statewide proposed tax levy increase this past September on average for all cities was at 8.4%. And then when you look at all taxing agencies, so that's when you include the county, the school district, cities, townships, any other taxing district, the average proposed property tax increase was at 7.3%. And that was what was established in September. Last year, I think by the time the final levy came in, so what was adopted by councils and county boards and school districts in December, it was about, I think, 0.6% lower than what the preliminary was, just to kind of give you an idea. One things that we look at is just the price of government. It's a comparison that we do. It's a formula that takes a look at the personal income and then the percentage of what is spent on local city services through property taxes, utility funds. You can kind of see what that historical percentage is. We've ticked up a little bit the last couple of years. Some of that was COVID related, seeing incomes decrease a little bit, and some of that is an increase in expenses that the city does. I think the state average, or the state's budget, is about 7-8% of price of government. So just for a comparison. So before we get into the budget numbers, I just want to touch on a couple other things. I find it useful, especially for people that maybe have questions on their value and their property taxes. A couple things to keep in mind: that there are 14 reasons that property taxes may vary from year to year. So that's Minnesota's taxing system, somewhat in a nutshell. But so any one of these 14 things could have an impact on why your taxes went up next year. What we have a control over here at the city is obviously the city budget and the tax levy. And then any special assessments that we may levy against a certain property. And then along with special districts. What are special districts? That would be the EDA, the HRA here in Hutchinson. I think it's Region 6, which is more about regional planning. They have taxing authority over a certain area. Those are what special districts are. But once again, there may be 14 different reasons on why your property taxes went up or down, depending on one of those various different reasons as listed here up on the screen. A couple other things just to keep in mind: that Minnesota's property tax system is based off of 5 components. Local property taxes, that's city, school district, county, which create your local property tax rate. That's what we'll be talking about tonight. The property tax classification rate, that's set by the state. That's anywhere from 0.25% to 2%. Your residential properties, I think, are at about 1%. Your commercial are usually around 1.5% to 2%. So the state has adopted a policy that states more or less that those that are income and generation, if you want to say, so if you're a commercial, industrial, you're going to pay a higher tax rate based off of the system that they've established. Like I said, we don't have any control over the classification that's assigned to a property that's determined by the state of Minnesota. The third component is property values, and that's based strictly off of property sales. So how are sales going in your community? That will have a direct reflection on what your value is doing on your specific property as well. And the property value is set by the county assessor. So if you've got questions on the value, we encourage you to talk with the assessor. The city is not involved in valuation setting on properties within the city of Hutchinson. Tax credits may have an impact. That's only on certain properties. Then state general tax is a component too, which is set by the state, and those are assigned mainly to commercial and industrial properties. So a lot of times you're going to hear, okay, Matt, you've talked about the property tax rate. What's that? That's what it gets signed to everybody's property on behalf of the city of Hutchinson. So that's how we collect taxes from you. And there's really two components. It's one, what the city sets its tax levy at, and then two, what the city's total tax capacity. And that's a combination of values of property. All the values within the city are lumped together. And that's how we determine, that's how the tax capacity is determined. And so for instance, I've given you what our proposed tax levy is for this year, what the tax capacity of the city is. That's how we establish a tax rate. That's at 54.22%. That gets assigned to every property within the city of Hutchinson, that's within our taxing district. That's the city's portion of the tax that you may be paying on your property. And so I've kind of put that out there so you can kind of get an idea of how a tax rate is established. And then how do you determine the city's portion of your proposed tax bill? You take your market value minus a homestead exclusion. That's a state, what's the best way to call it, Andy, tax?
See, it's property tax relief for residential property.
Yeah. So what happens is that if you look at your tax statement, you'll see on there, this is my property value. You'll see this is the state's exclusion. If it's a residential property, if it's not a residential property, you don't have that exclusion. That's a state policy. And what happens is that burden then gets shifted to all the other taxpayers within the community. So your commercial, your industrial, your apartments pick up some of those tax relief that occurs. So you need to know your home value, you need to know your exclusion, you need to know your tax rate. For most residential properties, that's 1%, times your city tax rate, and that's how you determine what your city's portion of your taxes is. And so I just use a home that had a value of $250,000. The city's portion of your tax statement should be about $1,276. For comparison, I kind of put up there what that same valued home would be paying in Glencoe and in Winsted based off of the same value and their property tax rate that they've established. So as we dive into the budget and tax levy, I always like to show this graph first. This just shows some of the options that the city has looked at. The option 4 on the far right is what was what our preliminary tax levy was established at. Current option 3 is what we're discussing tonight. And then we looked at something, a 7.4% tax levy increase, which would have maintained our tax rate, and then what a 0% tax levy increase would have looked like. I like to show this for a couple different reasons. One, you'll notice that if we had gone with a 0% tax levy increase, a home valued at $250,000 still would have seen a $46 increase in its property taxes. You may say, Matt, how's that possible if the city didn't raise its taxes? Well, the value went up. We go back to what are one of 14 reasons why your property taxes may go up. You may have seen an increase in your value. That could have triggered an increase in your property taxes as well. So even if we had done nothing for a tax levy increase, you would have seen a $46 tax increase on a home that's valued at $250. With what we're proposing tonight is a 7.2% tax levy increase, which does have a slight change and an increase in our tax rate. For a home valued at $250, you're looking at about $130 increase on the city's portion of your taxes. So if you take out $46 from that, that puts you at, what, $85 is roughly the responsibility of us raising our tax levy. I think that math is correct. All right. We talked a little bit about the homestead exclusion. Some of you may recall at one point it was called the market value credit, and so that was changed. This is kind of an explanation on what that does. Like I said, that's property tax relief from the state. And so while your value may be at a certain amount, you can only be taxed at a lesser amount, and that's where the state comes in with its property tax relief. That's how they do the calculations for residential properties. And this is just kind of a graph that shows where those kind of change and the different steps that come about. I think if you have a home that's valued at $413,000 or higher, you will receive no exclusion from the state, or no tax break, if you want to say, from the state. So this is just kind of a history of what we've seen in town for market value. You can see that we've seen a significant increase in the value throughout the entire community. I've got another graph that I'll break this down a little bit, but we did see a 5.7% increase from 2022 to 23. That was on top of a 15.9% value increase the year before. And since 2015, we've had an average growth of about 6.8% in value. To break this down a little bit easier, or hopefully make a little bit more sense, you can see on where those values occurred over the past several years. One thing to highlight is that the big jump was in apartments. From 2002 to 2022, they saw a 15.2% value increase. If you look back at the past couple of years, you can see what the history has been. And so you can see some of the residential, obviously it was a 5.9% increase this year. The previous year was 19.8%. The year before that was 11.1%. That along with apartments have seen the highest increase in value. You'll notice in 2021 there was a 40.6% increase in the value. And so some of that is the economy in the market, what the market is doing. So some of that is based off of direct sales of apartments, or houses. That's how that's determined. Once again, state mandates to counties and the county's assessors that you have to set valuations based off of sales that are going on within your community. So that's what has a large impact. What we're seeing is that prices are homes, apartments, businesses are selling at higher values than what they have in the past. So that's what's increased in the market values within a given community based off of whatever piece of property that you may or may not own. You can see that kind of the agricultural and commercial have been a little bit more steady. We don't have really a whole lot of agricultural in the town, so if an acre sells, it may have a huge impact, but it's really minuscule. Roughly 76% of our value is based off of our residential properties in town. The reason I share that, and this is important for the council to know, that's who faces the biggest burden when you raise taxes, is just because of the amount of value that's associated with residential property in town. So tax bill breakdown. So if you're looking at your bill that you received in the mail, sometimes it's a little bit easier just because I think sometimes they get a bill and they automatically think, well, it's all of the cities or it's all the counties or it's all the school districts. We try to do a job to kind of explain it for you a little bit. So roughly about, when you look at your total tax bill, you get roughly 36% of it is the city's portion, another 34%, 35% is the counties, the school districts about 29%, and those special tax districts make up about 2% of your tax bill. So that's kind of some of the background. Now we're going to get more into the details on what the proposed tax levy and general fund budgets are for 2024. As we jump in that, I always like to highlight our mission statement and our core values. One, the City of Hutchinson exists so that our residents, businesses, and property owners and visitors are provided with quality services and programs that support a safe, healthy, sustainable, and business-friendly community with a small-town atmosphere for our cost of government similar to are less than comparable outstate Minnesota cities. And we do that with 7 core areas of focus. 1 being public safety, 2 health and recreation, 3 transportation, 4 economic development, 5 the environment, 6 good government, and 7 housing. And 7th was actually most recently added by the council here in this past year. And so the reason I highlight this is that any aspect of our budget is going to focus on one of these 7 areas. I think every budget decision that you see, if you look at the details of the city budget, one of those 7, if not all 7, will be touched in various different ways by the budgets established by city council and staff. So with that, we'll look at proposed changes for 2024. So this is looking at our general fund. That is what pays for the day-to-day operations of the city. That's where most of your property taxes go and pay for. That's the majority of our tax burden, but we do have a couple other things that we'll highlight. So for 2024, we're looking at a 9.1% increase to our general fund. Tax abatement is going to be decreasing by about $5,000. That is for Uponor. That was a decision a previous city council made as a tax incentive to recruit them to come to town. They gave them a tax abatement. We have to acknowledge that and show that every year during our truth and taxation hearing. That's part of the reason that that's separated out of the budget, but that does have an impact on the rest of the community. And then we're projecting a 2.8% increase in our debt fund, and that's what pays for the various different capital projects within the city, mainly our road and street projects. For overall tax levy increase of 7.2%. So those are 3 aspects the city is directly involved in when establishing the tax rate. As I noted, we have 2 other special districts in town. That's the EDA and the HRA. They have 2 boards. Both are separate from the city council, but the city council has the final say on the levy that is established. So that's more or less the authority that the city council has. What they proposed with the EDA is a 5.7% increase. The HRA is a 2.8% increase for next year with a total tax impact. So once again, these are the various different taxing levels that the city has a final say on. I'm looking at about a 7.1%. Our direct involvement, though, is in the first 3 line items there, the general fund, the tax abatement, and the debt funds, and then more or less the council can reject tax levy proposals from the EDA and the HRA if they so choose. This is a breakdown of the various different debts that our debt levy will pay for. As we noted right here, that's the 2.47 that we are levying for next year. We also do collect special assessments. Anything that's GO bond issued is road related outside of the police facility that we borrowed money for, was it 2 years ago now?
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years ago. So that's the breakdown of what that debt levy is paying for. This is just a brief comparison of how that levy has looked since 2016. On average, we've seen an increase of 3.4% overall in our tax levy since 2016. Obviously, this year we're looking at 7.2% increase, which I think is probably the largest increase that we've seen in 10, 15 years within the community. Some additional information on the tax levy. The proposed 2024 tax levy includes a 9th straight year of an increase in the general fund portion of the levy. It's the 3rd straight year of an increase in our debt fund portion. Compared to 2024, our total tax levy increased by 35.2%, which is a 3.1% increase on average over that time period. Some additional information on the city's tax rate. The city's growth and tax capacity continues to do well. However, this will be the first time that the tax levy has outpaced the tax capacity in 10 years, resulting in a likely increase in our city tax rate. I say likely because it is very well possible that tax capacity could change. It could go up. Right now it's an estimate. It's usually a pretty good estimate, but if that goes up a little bit higher, that could actually lower our tax rate for next year. But the 2024 tax rate is expected to be 0.6% higher than our 2023 tax rate. Once again, this is the first increase in our tax rate since 2014. I know this a little bit earlier, but a median home value will see a $46 city tax bill increase based off of an estimated 8.7% increase in value. So that 230 is what we saw as our average value last year. The 250 is what we anticipate that number going to be at the end of 2023. The data I showed you earlier had values at 261,000 through October. That doesn't include short sales or things that aren't necessarily recorded through the Realtors Association. So that number usually comes down a little bit, and we'll get that. But that's usually our best way to kind of determine what our best estimate on a value. So a property possibly may not see a tax levy increase if its value did not increase at the same rate as the median home values throughout town. That is possible. Once again, a property valued at $230,000 in 2023 with the same value in 2024 would see a $12 increase in its city's tax bill. Most likely, though, just based off of sales, you're going to see an increase in your home value. That's just looking at our tax rate over the last 10 years. Once again, 2014 was the last time that our tax rate actually increased. But we've been on a steady decline. Some of that, once again, is the increase in value that we're seeing within the community, and then the councils. I guess they've kept the tax levy below the increase in value increases, which has allowed that tax rate to come down. So while we've increased it at a nominal or about 3% on average over the last couple of years, we've seen value outpace the growth of our tax levy increase, which has reduced that tax rate. So as we look into the general fund, we look at the revenues that are proposed for next year. Once again, you see that 9% increase in property taxes. That's what goes directly to our general fund. The other taxes that we have listed on there, that includes our lodging tax, the cable TV franchise tax. We're not expecting any increases in that. Licensing and permits, you see about a $50,000 reduction in that. Some of that is what we see going on in the economy. While home construction is still doing well, it's not at the level it has been the previous 4 or 5 years. And so we're anticipating that instead of building 30 to 35 homes, we're probably going to have 20 to 25 homes built, which is why we're reducing our projected revenues when it comes to building permits. Not just for the council and the public's sake, the last 3 years have probably been record years outside of this year, record years for building permit fees based off of the growth that we saw in the community. But with higher interest rates, higher costs of product, we're seeing less interest in construction in the community. Intergovernmental revenue, you see an increase of 13.1%. That includes local government aid increase that we received. We received a local government aid increase of about $399,000. The city's policy is that half of that goes into the general fund and half of that goes in our capital improvement plan for facility upgrades. So the general fund will show roughly that $200,000 increase in local government aid that we're projected to get in 2024. Charges for service, you'll see a pretty significant decrease in that of about just over $300,000. As was shared at the last council meeting, that's a reflection of the hospital security going away. For years past, the city provided security for the hospital paid us for that security. They are now taking that security in-house themselves, and so that's where that loss of revenue, you'll also see it in the expense portion. But in the charges for service, that's where that significant decrease of 11.6% is there. Rent and forfeitures, that's not a significant portion of our revenue, but it is something that we highlight. Miscellaneous revenue, we see an increase of about 21%. Most of that is associated with higher interest rates. So we're getting more return on our investment, and that's where that's showing up in the miscellaneous revenue standpoint. The transfer ins, of a 3.2% increase. That includes the pilot of the payment in lieu of taxes that we get from Hutch Utilities. That includes the transfer that we get from Creekside, the transfer we get from the liquor store, and then the transfer that water and sewer pay into the general fund to help pay for administrative costs that are associated with operating those two funds. So when people ask, okay, where's the money that comes from the liquor store, Creekside, Hutch Utilities? That's in the transfer in portion. It's about 2.8 million a year that we receive from those various different entities. When we look at our general fund, to kind of break it down, roughly 43% of the revenue that we collect in our general fund comes from property taxes. Roughly 20% comes from the transfers in. Once again, that's the Hutch Utilities, liquor store, Creekside. 17% is charges for services, so that's when you go and use the rec center, the ice arena, we charge you for it, or the DMV. Those are the revenues that get collected there. Intergovernmental revenue, that's your state aid. Licenses and permits are roughly 3% of our general fund revenue. Then the other taxes that were highlighted is about 2%. Those percentages are roughly the same as what they've been historically. I think last year we were at 41% on taxes, and we were a little bit higher in charges for service. But once again, we saw the hospital money is leaving. That's where some of those percentages shift. So some additional facts in the general fund revenues. The general fund revenues include a 9% property tax increase. As I noted, property taxes account for 43% of our general fund. Does include a pilot increase from Hutch Utilities of just over $38,000. Some of our state aid, the local government aid increase, that's that $199,000, and the fire and police pension aid is increasing, but once again, that goes right back to both the fire and the police and their pension funds. It includes a reduction in building permit fees of about $50,000 and the loss of the hospital security revenue, which is just under $348,000. I like to highlight the transfer ins. If we were to eliminate the liquor fund, Creekside, and what we get from Hutch Utilities, we would need to have a 48% tax levy increase to either make up for that lost revenue or a 48% reduction in expenses to make up for that. We're seeing some increased revenue from higher interest rates, and then a 1% tax levy increase to the general fund is equivalent to about just over $58,000. So now we'll jump into the general fund expenses and what's being planned for 2024. You'll see roughly a 3.7% increase in wages and benefits. Once again, that is our highest expenditure within our general fund, is the cost for the employees that we employ, obviously, here at the city. We see an increase in supplies of about 8.7%. Once again, that's, I would say, probably directly related to inflation, as most of us are seeing in our day-to-day lives. The costs to operate at the city, those expenses are higher than what we've been seeing in the past. And it's the same for services and charges. Miscellaneous expenses, roughly 2.1%, and then transfers out of 5.8%. I think that's the city's contribution to the HAS facility, correct? And the fleet funding. So overall, we're looking at general fund expenses going up 3.7%, or what's projected to go up 3.7% next year. So where does that money get spent? Roughly 34% of that goes to public safety. Another 22.5% goes to cultural and recreation. So that's the library, the rec center, aquatic center, park and rec system. 15.2% goes to streets and highways. I always like to preface that most of our capital expenditures, however, are in streets and highways, so that doesn't show up in our general fund. And then roughly 26% of that goes to general government. That's administration, finance, legal, planning, zoning, all fall under the general government. This is what our general fund budget history has looked like over the last 12, 13 years. We'll see a significant increase in 16 to 17, and that's when the aquatic center came on. And so that's where you saw a huge jump in expenditures there. A lot of the other expenditures have been employee and wage related, as we've Some of you may recall at the end of the 2000s, the city cut its staff significantly, I think by about 50 full-time employees. And once the economy started coming back, some of those employees have been hired back, or similar positions have been hired back. And services have kind of come back to where they were potentially cut probably in the late 2000s. We're still about 10, 15 employees below our peak level, which is I think about 2007, 2008. And so, and as I'll touch on later too, that's one of the significant reasons for the large increase as we look at next year's budget as well. As I highlighted, wages and benefits increased by just over $357,000. A lot of that includes performance increases and other annual adjustments. I guess the biggest burden, the biggest impact that we saw is that we saw a 25% increase in our health insurance costs for 2024, which I think is about $205,000 to the city. That was after several good years where we saw reductions, but that's probably the biggest impact for our wages and benefits for next year. As I noted, the expenses include elimination of hospital security. And one of the things that we did with the council's desire to try to lower that burden was that there was a full-time public works position that was included in the preliminary budget. We have removed that. We will not be filling that position in 2024 to help, we said, lower some of that tax burden on the public. Wages and benefits, as I noted, account for 67% of the expenses within our general fund. It's our largest expense. We are a people person industry in local government. We don't necessarily have equipment. It's people is who we use to operate what we do here at the city, and so that's our largest expense. We do see supply costs going up by just over $86,000 due to some of the higher costs associated with inflation and I think everything else that people are dealing with in their day-to-day budgets as well. For the most part, departments have held budgets flat other than the wages and benefits and some of the inflationary factors. The 2024 budget as presented tonight is balanced between expenses and revenues. And the reason I highlight that is that we could dip into fund balances, but that is not a proposal that's in front of the council tonight for your consideration. So that's the main portion of the Truth in Taxation hearing. I do like to highlight some of our enterprise funds just so the public is aware of that. Once again, no tax dollars go into these funds. These are all funded by the service fees that the various different departments collect. And so you see the liquor fund, so obviously those that go on and use our liquor store, the revenues are more than sufficient to cover the expenses. So you'll see what's been proposed for revenues and expenses, and some of those you'll notice the negative, and I'll highlight that just here in a second. The compost fund, that's Creekside. The refuse fund, that's our garbage, municipal garbage that we have. The water system, the wastewater system, and the stormwater system are all laid out there. And these are some of the cash flows. And so if you see some negative cash flows, that's because we're using cash to pay for capital expenses. So for instance, in the liquor store, we need to buy a new refrigerator, freezer, we need to make upgrades to the counters. And so that's where if you see a negative cash balance, it's done by design, it's on purpose. We're using cash to pay for those needed improvements. Same thing really with the compost, refuge, water, wastewater, and stormwater. Some quick facts and price funds. Liquor Hutch and Creekside continue to do well and contribute over $670,000 to the general fund in 2024. What is being proposed for next year is a 5% increase in garbage rates. This will be the first time since 2008 that we have done that. Most of that is just because we've seen increased costs of hauling. We went with a new hauler in 16, otherwise we would have been looking at rate increases in 16. When we switched, that allowed us to kind of push it back. So we're seeing an increase in hauling rates, increase in disposal rates, and our city's annual cleanup is costing us more. And so that's one of the factors that's led to the 5% increase in the garbage rates. Otherwise, all the other enterprise funds continue to have healthy fund balances. There's a slight increase in our stormwater rates, but there are no other proposed rate increases for water or sewer. Transfers to the general fund from the enterprise funds will be at $870,000. And then when you include the money that we get from HUC, it's just over 2.8 million. As I've shared many times over the last couple of years, capital needs due to the age of the facilities are starting to increase, but as noted, we do have healthy fund balances where we're able to cover most of those costs without having to have rate increases. That $870,000 is about 5.8% of our general fund revenues, and when you include HUC into that, it ends up being about 19%, as you saw in the previous draft. So looking at briefly, this is our 2024 to 2028 5-year capital improvement plan. That's our major capital items. So that'd be things like buildings, streets, any other facilities that we budget for outside of our general fund. Now the general fund may help pay for that, but there's various different sources that I'll show you that help pay for those major capital needs. So over the next 5 years, we're investing roughly $70 million into the various different aspects of the city. Just over $23 million is going into infrastructure. Another $20 million roughly is an enterprise fund, so that's improvements at Creekside, liquor store, the water plant, wastewater plant, stormwater system. Just over $15 million is in public works. The big thing in that is the proposed upgrade to the Hats facility. Roughly just over $6 million in park and rec, so that might be improvements to any one of our park and rec system facilities. Public safety, just over $3 million. I think the big expense in there is the ladder truck has been included in the 5-year plan. And then general government, that would be technology and or upgrades to the city center or this facility. That's over the next 5 years. So where does that come from? So we're looking at about $70 million, roughly $20 million. We're anticipating to get either state aid, federal aid, or donations to help pay for that portion of it. Another $18 million comes from our enterprise funds. So that's either the water plant or the water system, the wastewater system, liquor store, Creekside, paying for those improvements out of the fees that they collect. Roughly $13.2 million is new debt. That stays consistent with our debt plan, the amount that you saw tonight. About $8.9 million comes from taxes. That's not necessarily new taxes. That may be taxes that we have levied in previous years and set aside for future capital needs or for capital improvements. About $5.3 million of that is for special assessments. Right now, we've identified $2.7 million in unfunded. I think most of that is the splash pad that we've identified, but right now we don't have a funding source for. And then we have some special fund reserves, so like the rural fire department. We've got some cooperative agreements that kick into those capital needs as well. If we were to look strictly at what's being planned right now for 2024, you see that breakdown. Just over $7.3 million is going to our enterprise funds. Another $4.3 million to infrastructure. That's mainly our street improvements. $835,000 to our public works. $1.3 million in our park and rec system. $230,000 in public safety, and then about $200,000 in general government. So this is the city's debt management plan. It is tracked out, going all the way out to 2035. So decisions that we make today are factored into future years. So people may wonder, okay, what does the city's debt look like? And this is what it looks like for the foreseeable future unless the council makes a policy decision to change something. And so some of this, you'll see the steady increase. That was the plan and the decision made by the city council when they built the police station. And so that's why you'll see that red line steadily increase over the years to come. And you'll see what's the yellow has obviously been identified as the police facility fund. You'll see what our existing debt is and what's being proposed in the future for future debt. That allows us to keep that tax levy for our debt portion relatively steady. I think we're looking at about a 2.3% increase, and that's probably where we'll be at in that portion of it for the next 10, 15 years. So like I said, there's a lot of information, and I can easily go back and cover any of this. But just to kind of, as a summary and to highlight some of it, what we wanted to do was kind of show you, once again, where we're at with our proposed levies. And this graph kind of shows where we're at in September, what we've eliminated since that time, and what's being considered by the council here in December. Like I said, we're looking at a 9% total general fund increase. When you add the debt, it's 2.8% for total tax levy, proposed tax levy increase for 2024 at 7.2%. And then when you factor the EDA and HRA levy request, that ends up being a total tax impact of 7.1% for 2024. Once again, just a summary. Looking at a 3.7% increase in our general fund revenues, which is matched with a 3.7% increase in expenses. And then once again, just a breakdown of the various different tax levy increases. So part of the reason tonight is why our property tax is going up 7.2% in the city, for the city's portion in 2024. Our biggest factor is that general wage and is the cost of our employees, general wage and benefit increases, along with a significant increase in health insurance costs. As I know, that's over $200,000. That's projected for next year, which has us having those costs at just over $357,000. Obviously, just like everyone else, we are seeing some inflationary factors. That's, I don't think anything new for anybody, but it does have an impact, especially when we're sometimes 2-3 years back behind trying to get pieces of equipment ordered. And you start to see those costs go up. And then some of it, as long as we talk about inflationary and economic factors, we are seeing some decrease in revenues just because the projection of building activity to decrease in the next year. Once again, 1% levy increase total is just over 82,000, and the general fund is just over 58,000. And as I noted, once again, wage and benefits are 67% of our general fund expenditures. So, some additional information on the proposed budget for 2024, outside of eliminating the hospital security and not adding additional public works employee. The budget includes no other significant increases or cuts in staffing or changes in service. As I know, staffing costs and capital needs are the biggest driver of our budget. Fund balances continue to remain high, and the fiscal condition of the city is healthy. I think our general fund balance is about 54% of projected expenditures. Recommendation is anywhere in that 35 to 50%, so we are financially healthy as a city. While things are slowing down, home values continue to increase, and the city is continuing to see some growth at all levels. Like I said, it's probably not as in high of demand as it was 3-4 years ago, but there is still interest in expansion within the city. And kind of like everyone else, inflation and supply chain issues are impacting the city as well. So again, a lot of information. It's really only probably a tidbit of what we really have. We can always go into more detail. I've got Andy Reed with me tonight and Justin Jorgensen, our Finance Director and Assistant Finance Director, to answer any questions from either the council or the public along with myself. But just a couple things. Next steps, any additional questions from council members, and then I would encourage you to open up for any questions or comments from the public. As I noted right now, it's our plan to have the council approve the final budgets and tax levies at your December 19th city council meeting, and then the levies need to be certified to the county by December 30th, and so we could always delay some of that. Outside of the public hearing tonight, the council will have a discussion on the proposed budget at their meeting next Tuesday. And then once again, the adoption of that will take place on December 19th, most likely. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you to, I guess, any questions from the council, or open it up for any public questions or comments.
I think it's hard, I'm glad that you came back from the 9.2 to 7.1. It's hard to bring it to the city that any increase, but I think Andy's been pretty done well with our financing, whether it's our, plans for the future, we've kept our bond rating the same, so when we have had to borrow for projects, it's kept our rating. Andy, I forget what the actual thing is, but.
Double A minus.
Double A minus, and I mean, that's been something that's gone on for years and years, so I mean, it's no fun to ever propose a raise, but I think you guys have done pretty diligent work in getting to this. Just don't go at 7% next year.
Well, you know, and just to be fully transparent, you know, we didn't change anything with our health insurance plan. We talked about it, we say, you know what, we had 3 good years of which we saw 2 years of decrease and 1 year of a 0% increase. We're gonna share the burden with the employees. Now, if we look at another 25% increase next year, I can't sit here and say that's sharing the burden. We're gonna have to look at something different. But historically, we've done well in the health insurance. You hope it's one bad year, but it did have an impact on the budget. And if we see it again, it'll have probably deeper impacts on both the employees and the city in the years to come.
With those transfers in, you know, the Creekside and the liquor store and stuff, that really helps us to keep our services up at a high level. But, you know, if we wouldn't have those, you know, the tax burden would be a lot more.
Yep, I think it'd be a lot more, or you'd have a lot less services. I mean, that's the conversation that the council has each and every year is, what's the level of services you want to provide at the community and at what cost? That's part of the purpose of this meeting tonight, is to have feedback from the public on the cost of that service.
Yeah. One thing is, we all live here and we all pay the same taxes, so, you know, make sure we're doing the best we can to keep the taxes low. Any other questions for Matt? I'll open it up for public comment. If anybody wants to address the council, just please come forward and state your name and address. With that,
No, go ahead. This is the first time being here. Thank you for having me.
So we always like having first timers.
Yeah. So I don't live here, but I own a couple of apartment buildings. And
okay, can you just state your name and address, please?
Bill Ask, and I own a building over by 3M, the River Ridge Apartments, and then I own one up off of Carolina Avenue.
All right, thank you.
And so I bought that in 2019, and I haven't come and talked, you know, and I wanted to before, and I don't want to talk about valuation, and, you know, I know real estate well, I know commercial real estate, and I know residential real estate. I don't think they really jive, and I'm not sure, I'm asking more for advice too, because do I talk to McLeod County? Do I go to that meeting in 2 days at McLeod County?
I think the big question is, is the concern on the value, or is it not?
Well, it's more, so I'll give an example. In 2019, I bought one property, the taxes were $23,264. And the property taxes proposed for this year are $51,000, so they're like over double.
So what was the value, can I ask you what the value of that apartment was in 2019 and what it is?
It was 1.4, that building was 1.4 million and now it's worth 2.87 in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the increase so where I'm getting at, where I'm looking more for advice is the increase in property taxes. I own another building too. You know, I don't know, taking out what McLeod County does and what we're at, I don't know if I was at 7% increase or not.
Sure.
But that coupled with last year's deal of 2023 decreasing the price, the taxes, decreasing the taxes, but increasing the water and sewer to be about an equal. The water and sewer, it was about an equal. And then now 2024, just popping it back up, it was kind of like a shell game to me, is what I kind of saw it as. We're gonna decrease the property taxes, but we're gonna increase the water and sewer. Where I'm getting at more than anything is all of this trickles down to a renter, right? And I'm already at, I would say, maximum for workforce housing, right? You can't compare a property, Highland Apartments or the Matt Ward Apartments that he's doing up by the fairground, or this new development that's gonna go over here. I mean, those are $2,000 a month. You know, I'm doing workforce housing.
Sure.
So the same valuation and getting that same tax is going straight to the tenant, and the tenants aren't affording it. So like, I have roughly 50 units, and I would say right now I have 10, so 20% of my people they can't pay their full amount.
Sure.
They can't pay their full amount of rent right now. So imposing now an additional rent increase, which I don't want to do, I kind of have to. So where do I sit? Where does our workforce housing people sit? Somebody can't afford it, right? So I can evict them, or I can ask them to leave, but then where are they gonna go? And I'm providing housing, so.
So the interesting thing, you said your taxes went down last year?
In 2022, on this property, they're 50 grand.
Mm-hmm.
2023, they were 43,000. So there was 2020, there was a 28% increase. 2021, there was a 15. 22, there was a 25% increase each year. 2022, there was another 25. 23, there was a negative 13%. So it went from 50 to 43.
So the interesting thing is during that time period, we've increased our tax levy every one of those years.
You've increased your tax levy.
Yes. So some of that, I was going to say, I think points to the value that's been assigned to the
Right.
property. As I noted over the last, so since you buy your property, we've probably had an average tax increase of about 3.5% to 4%. So that does play into some of those increased costs. I think that's important for the council to know too. But when you say that the value went from 1.4 million to 2.8 million, that's probably the biggest impact on your taxes going up. Because like I said, we share just a comparison of a house. For instance, if we had raised no taxes from the city standpoint, they still would have seen a tax increase because their value went up. So some of that plays into it. Now, I'm trying to think back to when the school referendum kicked in. Was that 20 or 21? 19 or 20, so since that time you've had a school referendum that went into effect, I think, or was it even before then? I don't remember, and I'm not sure what the county has been too. So there are...
11? Is the county at 11?
Was that 2 years ago? Might have been.
Well, I'm not positive how, you break it down with McLeod saying the values, but also, with the values there, here's just for an example, like the Highwood apartments up by Menards. Those were built in 2020. And
yeah, 18, 19, 20.
And it was sold. Well, for one, the actual sales price, when you see the sales price, it's not always the sales price, right? There's different things that people owing people, kickbacks, commissions, seller carrybacks, all sorts of things. Those sold for $120,000 a unit, which, okay, that was a pretty good price. You would think in 21, right? So they're taking those. Here were the last ones. Carolina Avenue up here I bought for 68. Echo Drive over here sold for 58 a unit. Fremont Avenue just sold like 2 months ago, 71 a unit. Those are comparable properties to this right here, which this tax valuation says 80,000 on my tax.
Sure.
So they're comparing it to like a comp from a new development. This is a 1980s building. It's not a 2021 build. So, and I don't know how they differentiate that,
Sure.
but there's a difference.
Yeah.
Because
And the county-
their rents are $1,600 a month. These over here are $850.
Yeah, and the county will be able to do a better job of answering that question than I can, because I think when they do comps here, they use all of home sales. And Andy, maybe you know a little bit more.
Well, I'm guessing that when you purchased the property, that triggered a higher valuation right there. Guessing you paid more than what the tax value was, so that's probably some of the jump.
Yep.
But, yeah, I'd be curious.
I paid
who
1.7.
I'd be curious who they're comparing you to.
Well, they have to be comparing to the local sales,
So
right?
that would be a conversation with the county assessor's office, I would
Correct.
say. And if after that you're not happy, then maybe you consult an attorney for a tax appeal.
And how well does that work if you're one person doing that, or if you're two people doing that?
Oh, they have tax appeals at the county every year, several of them. Whether they win or not, it's up to the judge, but something you could look into with other avenues.
Yeah, and we've had several properties in town that have impacted us because they've negotiated, or they've had tax settlements that lowered the values. So it's not unheard of. It's, so, in a roundabout way, value has a big impact in that. I mean, and what we adopt here at the city does too, but I guess what I'm saying, on average, the city's tax levy increase since 2019 has been around 3.5% to 4%. So that's had an impact, but not an impact that would go from $23,000 a year in taxes to $50,000 just in the city. So that would be, like I said, now I can't speak for what the school district has done for increases and what the county has done for increases as well.
Right, and how you said too, that apartments and commercial businesses were taxed differently. But where it's coming to, and maybe that's more the question too, and maybe this isn't the time to say that, but it is affordable housing.
True.
I mean, I don't know any affordable housing that's being built here. I know some high-end housing that's being built.
Well, we know it's a huge challenge that we have. I don't know if you saw a recent housing study that we did that identified all needs of housing. And that's something that actually we're going to be talking about here the first half of 2024 is there something the city should be doing to incentivize some of that workforce housing? Because we know it's a huge need. It's here, it's really all over the place.
Or incentivize the ones that are keeping their housing affordable.
Yep, and that's a variable possibility as well. So.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank
Yep.
you.
Head over to McLeod County. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
It's fair, right?
No, she's the one that sends us off, it's going to see the assessor.
The McLeod County section.
Evening, Jim Lauer, 775 Laura Avenue, Southwest. Usually get to watch this on television in years past, and I've had the same question every year. Now that I'm recently retired, I've got the flexibility to come and ask in person. It has to do with the questions with the enterprise funds. Now, the bulk of the enterprise transfers in come out of the utilities, Hutch utilities. About 2,000 of the 2,700 that you've got. So the lesser funds of the others. I guess my question is, when you list year after year, you show the enterprise funds and the budgets, each year the revenues are less than the expenses. So if revenues are less than expenses, where's the money come from that gets transferred back in to the city? My basic math, expenses from revenue ends up being a negative $400-some-thousand, but they're transferring in 660 from, let's say, the liquor store in Creekside specifically. So that's my question is, where's that magic math happen, or is it somewhere else? And then the other part is, do we have the ability to get those budgets in detail, just like by departments? Because a lot of these are all rolled up numbers, but I don't know how much of the budget when we talk about personnel is the police department, the fire, the city staff, and those kinds of things would be the other side of it. But that's as to the first question.
So I guess the second question, yeah, we can get you a detailed department. That's not a problem. I'll probably hand it over to Andy because this is a question that I know everyone sees, and this is the accountant side of government math. It's probably the best way to do it, so go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, the easy answer is depreciation. Within our financial statements, we have to depreciate our facilities, and some of these utilities have a lot of infrastructure and facilities, expensive infrastructure that we're depreciating. So I think in the wastewater fund alone, it's upwards of 1.8 million of annual depreciation that gets expensed on our P&L, which ends up showing a negative net revenue, for instance, but it's not a cash item. We're basically covering or setting aside, well, you're essentially accounting for future replacement of those facilities or for that infrastructure. You're not actually laying out that cash. In a perfect world you are, you're putting that cash away so it's there, but it's not within the P&L, it's not a cash item. So you pull depreciation out of our P&L, and all of a sudden we've got cash flow of maybe $1 million.
And I know all those capital things are rolled up at the city level for, total capital improvements, but do we have that detail for things like the liquor store? And are they actually self-sustaining without other funds having to be transferred in to sustain an enterprise?
Right.
So we can answer that question. There are no other funds that go into enterprise or any of the enterprise funds. So there's no tax dollars that go into any of the enterprise funds. They are all self-sustaining. Every single one. Creekside, liquor store, water plant, wastewater plant, and wastewater system and the garbage system. Right.
And I guess that would be the nice thing to see with those is what they're actually bringing in after you take those things out versus what they're actually costing.
The best thing would have been
in a forum like this.
Sure, and we can do that. It's how much do you dive the numbers. We actually went through that at our last workshop on the 28th of November, went through all those details.
It just looks like for enterprises, which we all equate to businesses that we run, that they're businesses that aren't making a profit. Sure. But they're still paying the city money. So that's just the open question that it'd be nice to see that explained in the future in a little more detail.
I think that, Jim, I had the same question when I first got on the council, because I sell liquor to liquor stores, and I don't take commissions, I want that to be clear. But I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't hit. And then when I asked Andy, it was a depreciation. So maybe
Store's not
another parentheses, you could put depreciation.
And the liquor store's not paying property taxes, and the liquor store's not paying, or Creekside's not paying property taxes. So some of that's, a cost to the city versus what they're actually giving to the city, what would be that trade-off? And it's just understanding those numbers.
Yep, and we can easily get that to you, Jim. If you want to give us your email, we can send stuff to you. So
I can give you the presentation from last week's enterprise.
Speaking of the first year, Jim, yeah, when Matt sends out the budget and says there'll be a test on all 280 pages, it's a test.
yeah.
And one thing with government accounting, we have separate funds for each enterprise. So if there's any sharing of funds, it shows up as a transfer of funds, which the council would have to approve. So it's fairly transparent.
Any other comment? Anything else from the council? No? Matt, do you have anything else for
No,
us?
like I said, I would just, I got my business cards out there. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me. If you want more details, like Jim noted, we'll easily get that to you. We've got it, like I said, we try to do the condensed version because we've got 200 and some pages of
Here all night.
we're all night going through. And so if anybody wants more detailed, we can easily share that with them. Just ask them to reach out to us and we'll gladly send those files their way. So, otherwise, like I said, we'll have an update on the budget at our next meeting on December 12th, and the council will be looking to approve those final budgets on December 19th. So,
Entertain a motion to close the truth and taxation meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Pat, second by Chad to adjourn the meeting. Any other discussion? All in favor?
I think we could look at Andy giving a 200-page presentation, because I know he loves public speaking, so.
Well, I think the treasurer from the EDA board should help out.
Yeah. whoever that guy is, so, all right, we can call the motion now.
All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carried.